Today, David Sunshine 867 brings you the D.Q.G3 Tiny 26650 review. It is a deceptively powerful flashlight. Just because it fits in the palm of your hand doesn't mean that it doesn't throw out a lot of power. You'd think that it only puts out about 1000 lumens, but when you turn this thing on by holding turbo, it blows your socks off. Be careful if you hand this to normal people, they will blind themselves or hurt their eyes with it. It pushes out about 3000 lumens, and it does that by using a DC to DC boost driver, which kicks it up to 20 plus volts. So it's taking your 4 volts from your battery and jumping it up all the way to 20 volts. That's how it gets that 3000 lumens, and that's how it drives these 7 LEDs in series. The forward voltage of each LED is about 3, so 3 times 7, 21 volts right there. And by having that high voltage, you don't have to have the high amperage. So it's the same thing in the city. The distribution of power is by high voltage, usually 25,000 kV, and then using transformers they step it down to 120, 208 or 240 so that you can use it in your home. So this is the same thing, they're increasing the voltage and reducing the current. So as you can see here from the trail shot, this thing can light up the entire place. It looks like daylight almost. I'd say that this little thing performs as well as the Skyray King, which is the size of a soda can and a lot heavier. And this thing can actually light up the entire field, and you can actually see all the way across the field using it. You can search back and forth with this thing and see anything in the field that you want to. So no other light out there tries to use a boost driver to jump it up to 20 plus volts, and I think they've done a very good thing putting that boost driver into here, using those 7 LEDs in series and putting a nice TIR optic on the front of it. It keeps it very short, compact, but still makes it very capable of creating a lot of power and punching it out in a medium distribution. It's very powerful for a tiny 26650 light. I think the name is perfect for it because it's a very tiny light, a lot of output. You can use it when you're walking around on the sidewalks, you put it in your pocket, you won't even notice this thing. It's an everyday carry that gives you 3000 lumens. It's what everyone's asking for, and I think that's exactly what people need. Just quickly, I'll go over some pros and cons about this light. Definitely good because it can push out over 3000 lumens. It's pretty small and can be used as an everyday carry. You use a good 26650 so you can push a lot of power out and have a lot of energy in your hand. On the lowest mode it can run 37 hours, which is pretty good. And it has a 90-second turbo timer. And it's water resistant, so if you gotta use it in heavy rain for many days on a hike or during work, it can do that. So now some bad things about it is that on super high mode it can get pretty hot, up to 67 degrees, so you definitely have to manage that and reduce it to medium or something. For an everyday carry, it's pretty heavy, it's 188 grams, so that's similar to the Convoy C8, or like 3 big Mars bars in your pocket. The side switch is nice, but it is a little bit too small, and it's hard to press, but you can fix that, and I'll show you how you do that later. And then it's got a plastic front. The TIR optic is just exposed and doesn't have a glass lens on it, but you can fix that as well by adding a clear piece of plastic underneath the stainless steel bezel. And then since it has 7 multiple LEDs, you're going to get multiple shadows, but if that's not a concern for you, that doesn't really matter. And because they put a lot of technology into this thing and those 7 LEDs, it does cost them quite a bit to build it, so the price is a premium price. But if you want a good compact everyday carry that can push out 3000 lumens, where they put a TIR optic into it, they put the DC to DC boost driver into it to make it run those 7 LEDs, then this light is definitely worth it. So I'm going to do a quick review briefing to give you a summary of the entire light, and then I'll go into detail, and it's going to take a lot longer, but I think it's pretty interesting still, so stay tuned for that if you want to know everything about this light. So in this review briefing, I want to tell you about each specification, what they specified, and then what I found. So they said it would push out 2500 lumens, and I tested it to about 3000 lumens peak. And then it will drop down to about 2700 lumens, and then drop down to high mode after turbo. So this is a good performer, and they didn't over specify the amount of light that it puts out. They said the throw distance is 150 to 200. I calculated it out to be an impressive 208 meters. You can see that in the beam shots, it definitely can punch the light out there.
Even with all this ambient light, the tiny 26650 can still light the crap out of that building. Boom, look at that. You can see all those floors, no problem. Even with all this ambient light. Is that crazy?
Its max beam intensity is 10,849, so you can use that as a comparison to other flashlights to see how good of a thrower they are. Its modes are limited, it doesn't have strobe and SOS, but a lot of people don't like those anyways. I think the low, medium, high, and turbo are very well spaced. They work very well for me. Now the max runtime is kind of a tricky thing. They say it's 200 hours, but since they have that DC to DC boost driver, it has a lot of overhead, and even on low 6 lumen mode, it does use up quite a bit of power, and I calculated to only last 37 hours. For water resistance, all the manufacturers say they get IPX8 to 2 meters or 1 meter or something like that. But whenever I test it and I only submerge it below 3 centimeters of water, a little bit of water always gets into the O-rings. Because of the O-rings in the body tube and not having a lot of grease on them, water will get into it, which is going to be representative of real life scenarios because you're not going to add grease to it every time you close it up. So you're not going to get the full water resistance. So I'd say that it's good against a whole day of heavy rain, but I wouldn't submerge it at all. They didn't specify an impact resistance. The impact resistance is going to be completely based on how the battery smashes up your circuit board. And if you drop that right on its head and the battery smashes right into that circuit board, as soon as that circuit board cracks, the light's going to fail. The circuit board to me seems pretty tough. So without a battery, it's very light, 93 grams, which is close to what they said, 92. But when you add that battery in there, you're more than double the weight. But if you can handle that, it's still a good everyday carry. And then we've got the 7 Cree XPG2s. I've got the 6500 Kelvin version, so it's high color temperature, high lumen output, and that's why you can see it all the way across that field. The TIR optic does a good job of creating a medium distribution, and that's why we can light up the field so nicely. And I really like the TIR optic that they put on there. It's a perfect distribution, it has a good nice beam angle, and it's very nice and smooth all the way out to 170 degrees. So you can see right in front of your feet very well, and it's the perfect walking light. So if you know anyone who goes on long walks, walks their dog or whatever, this is the perfect light for them. You have to teach them how to use it so they don't leave it on turbo or high for too long, otherwise it'll get hot. But once you teach them how to use a high powered flashlight, they can use it as a good tool. It's definitely not a toy, because if it overheats, it can burn them, or worst case scenario, cause the battery to explode. And that brings us to the next point. You need a good quality 26650. Panasonics have been tested to not explode under shorts or high temperatures, and hopefully the little catalysts, since they perform just as well as the Panasonics, they have all that safety testing and performance as well. I used a flat top unprotected cell in this thing, but I'm pretty sure it'll take button tops or protected cells because the tail is actually used as the conductor, so your battery can vary in length. Unboxing is interesting. It's the least amount of packaging I've ever seen for any flashlight, other than a plastic bag. It's just a tiny cardboard box with a label on it, and one spare O-ring inside. Nothing else. The side switch on this thing is very nice to have. I don't like the tail switches that much, but it is a little heavy to push. But you can easily rectify that by just unscrewing the body, getting to the driver, and putting a bunch of layers of packing tape onto the button, or you can super glue a little piece of plastic from a water bottle onto the button so that it's longer, and then your heavy push will be a lot lighter. And when it's a lot lighter, it's a lot easier to use. But of course, if you do that modification, it's going to be super easy to turn on, so it's going to burn a hole in your pocket. So make sure you twist the tail cap maybe half a turn or a full turn to lock it out so it can't be turned on anymore. And you definitely have to be diligent about that because this will be like a lighter inside your pocket if it goes off. So for color temperature, 6500 Kelvin is going to be all blue and white, and then 4500 Kelvin should be more of a neutral white. So in this chart, I show you what 6500 Kelvin looks like and what 4500 Kelvin looks like. 6500 Kelvin is good for the people who want higher lumen output and a nice glare causing light, better for tactical purposes. And then for those who like warmer light, you get 4500 Kelvin. If you're not sure which one you want, I would say just get the 4500 Kelvin and everyone should be happy with that. If you're seeking the highest lumen output and glare though, go with a 6500 Kelvin. The efficacy of this light is interesting because there's 7 LEDs on there when they're driving it in medium mode. I calculate it out to be 180 lumens per watt, and then when it's going full output, it's about 101 lumens per watt. And that's even after the DC to DC boost driver. So that's losing some efficiency right there. On turbo mode, this thing runs at 29.5 watts, so it's pushing out over 3000 lumens, or 7.19 amps at 4.2 volts. It'll eat up that battery in less than an hour if you run it on that. But since you have the 90-second turbo timer, you can't really do it unless you keep on clicking the button. And you can keep clicking the button, so it will keep getting hotter. So you gotta make sure you do it outdoors in the winter or something. The beam angles are 22 degrees for the beam, 42 degrees for the field, and then 177 degrees for the peripheral. The beam intensity profile is very smooth, so if you want a nice medium beam with gradual light out to the side, this is a light to get. That TIR optic performs very well, and I like the light distribution. Here's a beam shot in the trail. As you can see all the way down the middle, medium distance away, and right in front of you, and even to your peripheral, left and right, into the bushes. So this is a very safe light to use. There's no area where you can't see, and it produces enough light that you can see everything as well. So it has the good distribution and enough light to light everything up. That's why I keep saying this is a very good everyday carry. If you gotta walk through a dark trail like this, or any of your friends or family have to walk through a dark trail like this, they'll be more than happy to be using this thing. And then if you have to walk through a dark field, This thing works very well because you can light up everything. If anyone's across the field that is shady, you can see them. If you walk quickly, you can probably get across it before the turbo timer even runs out. And then we took this thing completely apart, and everything seems to be built very well. It all comes together very nicely, so this thing is well designed and well built. The machining could have been a little bit better. They could have finished everything nicer. It doesn't feel as good as a Manker or a U-Torch. The finish on those and the machining feels a lot better. But it's nothing really to complain about. It's just not as good as the Manker. They round a lot of their edges, and their anodization is very good. If manufacturers want to copy somebody, definitely copy Manker. And since they're just boosting up the voltage to change the dimming, there's very little pulse width modulation because they're not chopping it to cut the current. They're just creating lower DC voltage. So you get a 0.0 flicker index, 10% flicker, and 61 Hertz. So you won't see any flicker out of this thing, and it produces high quality light. The circuit is smart and it has low battery protection, reduces at 2.94 volts, and turns completely off at 2.85 volts. So it doesn't need a protected cell. If you put an unprotected cell in there, this thing will protect the battery for you. And it's good to note that it does have reverse polarity protection. I tried it backwards and it didn't burn it out or anything. The same thing can't be said about the U-Torch UT01. If you put the battery in backwards in that one, it'll create a direct short to that battery and it'll get very hot. It'll melt your tail spring and it could cause the battery to blow up. So make sure you don't flip your U-Torch UT01 battery backwards. Interestingly, the U-Torch UT01 didn't burn itself out when I reversed the battery, but it did cause the rear tail spring to melt itself down pretty well. But if I didn't take it apart, it might have caused some more damage or blown up. So with these 7 LEDs, you could do the cone doming or de-doming to make it an even better thrower. But I'm not going to bother doing that because the light is good the way it is. If you do want a little bit more throw, you can do that, but I'm not too sure it's worth it in this case. So the good news is that you can easily lighten up your button press, and I definitely recommend putting a piece of clear plastic over the TIR optic so you don't scratch it. Its only thermal management is the 90-second turbo timer. It doesn't have active thermal management, so it's not watching the temperature. It might have a high temperature cutoff, but it never reached it even at 67 degrees Celsius, and that's very hot. You can't touch that at all. It'll burn you within seconds. The price of this thing is $60, but it's definitely worth every penny because it's using that innovative boost driver and it's got those 7 good quality LEDs on there with a nice optic. You're never going to get a TIR optic like that anywhere else. That's why I'd say it's good value for your dollar, because you're not going to get a nice everyday carry that pushes out 3000 lumens. They've thrown a lot of technology and innovation into this thing, and that's the only reason that it can be this small, this powerful, and this effective at pushing out 3000 lumens. So I think we found a good quality palm-sized powerhouse here. It's super powerful and can light up your sidewalks, trails, parking lots, fields. Even this building over here can be lit up. So as you can see, I'm using this now as my main everyday carry. It's great in the winter when it's dark all the time. And the fact that it does get warm on turbo is nice in the winter because it's pretty cold out and you can use it as a hand warmer. So I think DQG has done a great job with this thing, those 7 LEDs and the nice shallow optic. I like that stainless steel bezel in the front as well. It seems nice and strong and just makes the light that much better. So I definitely recommend this light if you want a small capable light, a little bigger than the M3, but a lot more powerful. This is my new favorite everyday carry. So we have 3 comparison tables here, so you can compare all the lights. And on the first page, what's important to note is that it has 3072 lumens. In comparison to all these other lights, it's a lot more, and it's only trumped by the Convoy L6 or the Skyray King, which are much larger lights. So that's pretty impressive for this little tiny 26650 to do. Obviously at 29 watts they've got to have a good turbo timer on there, otherwise this thing will melt itself. Something else that's impressive is that its beam angle is 22 degrees, which is similar to the Skyray King's 20 degrees. So that TIR optic is so shallow, but it's still doing such a good job of pushing the light out the front and focusing it. Now we're going to move on to page 2. You can pause it to check this out if you want to see anything else. Otherwise we'll go to page 2. Here what's important to see is that it has a 0.0 flicker index. It could do that because it has a DC to DC boost driver, just like the U-Torch UT02. The U-Torch is boosting up to 12 volts, and the DQG is boosting it up to over 21 volts. Now we're going to jump on to the third page, and after we've gone through everything on this page, I've concluded that this thing is insane. Being that small and pushing out almost as much light as the Convoy L6 is no small feat. So all the hard work that the DQG guys did, I definitely appreciate it, and I can definitely see that they've done a great job just based on the performance of this light and just how it feels inside my pocket and how well it works. So I have to say this thing is just insane. It's around the same price as the L6, but if you want to fit that much power into this little tiny package, that's a small price to pay. Definitely worth every penny. So now let's take a deeper look into all the aspects of this light. First thing is the XPG2. It's not the newest LED, They have the XPG3 now, which is based on the SC5 technology instead of the SC3, but the XPG2 is still a very good LED. So they've got nice 7 LEDs sitting on this aluminum MCPCB board, and if you watch the traces, they're actually all in series. So here's the DQG compared to the Convoy L6 and the Skyray King. It's right up there with those guys. And being as small as the S2 Plus or F1, that's pretty amazing. It leaves the rest of these flashlights in the dust. So that's why I said it's insane. And then if you just compare it to all the everyday carries, you can see that it towers ahead of them all. But I just want to show you that compared to something like the Olight X7R, it actually isn't that powerful. So I'm saying it's very powerful for its size, but if you're after something that's super powerful, you can get more of a soda can style light. And they've also got the Acebeam X80, which says it puts out 25,000 lumens. So that'll be even brighter than the Marauder. And for those of you who are curious, this is the approximate equation that I've been using to calculate the lumen output of a flashlight based on my luxometer reading. So I shoot the flashlights through a couple of diffuser lenses, which eliminate any distribution variances. So if something's a thrower or a flutter, it makes them all flutters. And then that goes through my diffuser box, which goes to a light meter, and I've calibrated that light meter to a known XPL2. So I know how many lumens was going into it, and I know how many lux the lux meter was reading. I did a bunch of different test points, and then I created a trend line for it. So the approximate trend line is y equals 6.224 times x. And it appears that my lux readings are quite accurate for all the other flashlights I've tested. But as you can see, it's mostly linearly proportional. So if it was accurate for up to 600 lux, you can project that further, and it should be pretty accurate up high. So I just wanted to show you some of the behind the scenes calculations there. So if you run the flashlight on turbo, it'll drop down to high and then run for another 123 minutes before it drops down to moonlight or low. And I think that at 123 minutes it goes up to 67 Celsius because the boost driver is trying very hard to draw the power out of the battery. So it's drawing more current than it normally does, and it's actually generating quite a bit of heat. So that's probably why the temperature rises all the way up to 67 degrees there. So the boost driver is maintaining your output for high constantly, which is pretty interesting to see. So you don't get varying light levels that way. And then if we zoom into the end of the graph, 124 minutes, you can see that it drops down to low. It'll start blinking to tell you that it's about to shut off because of the low voltage protection. So here I have the power levels that I read, and I also measured how many lumens they put out. So the idle draw or parasitic drain of this thing is very low, 0.000011 amp. So the interesting thing here is that under low mode, it pulls 0.56 watts, but it only puts out about 6 lumens. So that's only 11 lumens per watt, but that's because the DC to DC boost driver is actually boosting up your voltage, so that's where all the wasted power is going. So low mode is actually not very efficient, but it still will give you 37 hours of runtime. Medium is the most efficient because they're boosting up the voltage, your LEDs are being used at their max potential, and you're getting 179 lumens per watt out of the whole system. That's pretty impressive considering that you're losing a lot of power in the DC to DC boost driver already. And then once you get up to high, you're pushing the LEDs, they're getting less efficient, but they're still producing 149 lumens per watt, which is a pretty high efficacy and pretty impressive. And then on turbo mode, you're using 29.5 watts, pushing out 3000 lumens. And if you keep it on turbo by double clicking it, it'll last about 42 minutes. But you can only do that in the winter, keep that in mind. And then at turbo, it drops down to 104 lumens per watt, which is expected. Medium mode is the best mode to use for walking because it's just the right amount of light. High is a little bit too much, and turbo is way too much. But I like to switch to turbo when I walk across crosswalks or pedestrian crossings so the cars can see you. So that's pretty handy to have. And in comparison, the 37 hours that the DQG lasts is not actually that long. If you use a Convoy with a Biscotti driver, you can get much longer run times, or the U-Torch or the F1. But the F1's moonlight mode is actually very low, and you probably wouldn't use it for much. So this slide quickly shows you how I measured the beam angle, field angle, and peripheral angle. Here you can compare it to the rest of them. So I've put the tightest beam angle at the top and the biggest beam angle at the bottom. So in comparison, you can see that DQG is third from the bottom. It's a pretty wide distribution, but it's perfect for the trail or just walking around, which is what you're going to be doing with the everyday carry. On this graph, you can see easily that it has the widest peripheral angle, and that's what makes it the greatest walking light ever. The other light that comes close to it is the S1R, and that's also using a TIR optic. So that's how they're able to check the light out to the edges. So if you take a look at the calculated candela, the DQG's candela is actually pretty high, considering that it's a medium optic, and that's because it has 3000 lumens. But the other lights with a tighter beam angle easily exceed that of the DQG. So don't expect the DQG to be a super good thrower. It's got the same throw distance as the Zanflare F1, which is pretty good, but it's a little bit less than that. So don't expect it to be a super thrower or anything. And you can directly see that on this throw distance graph. It's better than the Rufus G01, but it's not as good as the Zanflare F1. But it's definitely a lot better than the S1R, M3, those little guys, because it's got that 3000 lumens of output. And if you're interested in testing your own lights, here's the maximum intensity at 2.3 meters. So if you have a light meter and you measure your light 2.3 meters away and you read the max lux, then you can compare it to the max lux of all these other lights that I've tested. And I wanted to tell you that because you can test any one of your lights that you want if you have a lux meter, which is only like 20 bucks off AliExpress. If you want to know which light meter I've been using, I'll put the model number in the description. You can grab one for 20 bucks, no problem. And then measure the lux of your lights and do everything that I've done. So to calculate candela, all you got to know is your lux and how far away you measured that lux at. So go to these websites here. That's why I measured it at 2.3 meters away, so that I can calculate the candela. And lux is just the amount of light that hits a surface. So that's important because I measured the lux at a whole bunch of different angles and then I plotted that out, and then you can compare it to all the other lights. So here's the DQG's beam intensity profile. I measured it from 0 degrees out to 90 degrees. So to measure it, you can put the flashlight onto a protractor or something, and then when you turn the light 1 degree, you know that's the measurement at 1 degree. Turn it 2.5 degrees, then 4 degrees, 5 degrees, 6 degrees, all the way out, kind of like shown on this diagram, 2.3 meters away. So that's how you get the beam intensity profiles. And then when you plot it on a graph, you can see that the throwers give you the highest candela, or intensity, lux. And then if you change the y-axis to logarithmic, you can see the peripheral angle of all the lights. And here you can see that the DQG exceeds with the peripheral angle and floodlight. It's right up there with Convoy L6 even, or the Skyray King. So that's why it can light up the field and the trail just as well as those larger lights. The only problem is that it's not much of a thrower, so the U-Torch and the Convoy C8 will demolish it, and the Convoy L6, obviously. So we'll take a closer look at the beam shots and compare it to some other lights at the trail and at the field. Here's the 348. So you can see that sign over there, no problem. But it cannot light up that bridge because it's not a thrower. It's just a everyday carry. So if you have to walk through a trail like this in the dark, this thing does a great job. But that's about it. We've got here our S1R. Does a decent job of lighting up that trail and in front of you. Here is our thrower, the C8. Yeah, that will light up the bridge, no problem there. So this is basically just a thrower. You don't really want to use this as a walking light because that happens a lot. You kind of have to point it like this, and you don't want to be pointing it like this the whole time you're walking because someone might be there and you'll blind them like crazy. So this is not a great walking light, but it's a good thrower. Look at that. It has some peripheral light, as you can see, but this hotspot's going to keep blinding you like that. The DQG 650. It's tiny, but it's nuts. So let's hold it and power it up. Boom! Look at that. It's like the Skyray King, but a lot smaller. It's tiny, yeah. It lights up the bridge because of the massive amounts of light. It's not a thrower, but it still lights it up. Then it lights up the rest of the trail, your peripheral, everything. Lights it all up. And it has a very wide field angle, so it is lighting up right in front of you. You can see anything, rocks and dips, and you won't trip or anything. This is the great walking light, I'd say, and it's easy to carry because it's so small. Its diameter is a little bit bigger than the rest, but if your pant pockets can handle it, this is a good light to have. Like if you walk home in the dark all the time, this will help light up your way. Like you can walk down this trail no problem. And the beam's pretty wide and smooth, so when you point it right in front of you, it doesn't really blind you that much, like the C8 would. And the good thing is you can always just keep it on high, walk around, double click, light up the place if you need to, single click, brings it back to high. So it's a very easy light to use if you're walking around with it. And then of course our Convoy L6, which is nutty with its XHP 70 and 4000 lumens of output. Look at that, lights up the entire scene. It lights up that bridge no problem, and I'd call this a searchlight because you can search the entire field or trails or anything you gotta search, you can search. Look at that. Lights up into your peripheral and is a crazy beam. It'll blind yourself if you point it right in front of you. And that's just the nature of a super powerful light. And as always, the L6 impresses. Lights up the entire field, has good peripheral light, and this is a good searchlight. Here's the Skyray King. It's not meant to be a thrower, but it can light up that green door due to its massive amounts of light, and it lights up that building and all the other buildings. Skyray King is always a good player in the high output category. It's got a lot of peripheral light, as you can see, and a nice smooth gradient to the outside, so it makes a great walking light for anybody. Unfortunately, it's only $35 and the quality is very low because of that. But it's a good budget light if you need high quantities of light for cheap. Look at this, lights up this entire field, no problem. And here's the DQG 26650. It's basically like a Skyray King wannabe. Lights up that building, the door, and its peripheral angle is very wide, so you can see across the field to the left and right. No problem. We're getting like spider webs and stuff floating towards us. So the DQG does a great job lighting up left to right. You can see anyone in front of those buildings if they're running around. And so for something this tiny, that's very impressive. Has a 26650 in there, so even though it's putting out 3000 lumens, you can run that for quite a while. An 18650 is not going to do as well, so if you want massive amounts of light and good runtime, this is the way to go. 26650. It's actually really nice how it lights up this field for something this size. It's pretty awesome. C8, just a thrower. That's all it does. So if you sweep back and forth, it does a great job, but it focuses all that light down the middle. There's very little peripheral light, but there is some, so if you need to use this as a walking light, you can get away with it. Just kick it down to something low like this, and it won't blind you when you look right in front of you. So the C8 is always a favorite as a thrower. So now we'll take a look at the user interface and show you how it all works. You'll see on the top right there's a turbo. That one's pretty easy to get to. You just hold it for over a second to get to that one, like this, and then a single click turns it off. So that one's very easy to get to. And then you've got low, which is a triple click. That's low. Then turn it off with a single click. And then medium's easy to get to, it's just a single click. And then a single click to turn it off. And then we've got high, which is double click. And then another simple single click to turn it off. So those are the 4 different modes that you can get to from off. Pretty easy to do. And then once we get into those modes, it starts to get a little bit more complicated. So from any of the modes, low, medium, or high, you can get turbo by double clicking, and then just get back to your previous mode by single clicking. So I'll show you it from low. This is low. Now we're going to double click to turbo, and then you can single click to just go back to your previous mode. So we're back to low. Let's cycle over to medium by holding it for over a second. So now we're in medium. Let's double click to get to turbo, and then single click to turn it back to medium. Now we're going to cycle over to high, and then we can double click to turbo again, and then single click back to high, and then single click to off. So it's going to take 2 clicks to turn it off if you go to that turbo from low, medium, or high. So just keep that in mind. If you don't want that to happen, then just go to turbo from off, and then you can always single click to turn off. That's why I showed the turbo on the top right and the turbo on the bottom left, because they kind of act differently. So that's a pretty handy user interface. You can get to whatever mode you want at any time. So I think this is a very simple and effective user interface. So it said that the water resistance was IPX8, good down to 2 meters. But I put this thing under a little bit of water and it got some water into it. But it got so little water into it that it really won't affect it too much. So I think that you can hike with this thing in heavy rain and it won't affect it at all. Here's a close look at the TIR optic. You'll see some scratches on it already. That's from me testing it, keeping it in my pocket. So definitely put a piece of protective coating on it. so you don't scratch it up, because once you scratch up the TIR optic, it's going to screw it up. So that's a very good optic, and I like the distribution that it produces. You see there's some diffusing pattern between the lenses. That's what's causing the nice throw to these sides. So they've done a very good job with this thing. Here's the 7 LED board, and as you can see, there's 7 LEDs in series. 2 nice silicone conductors up into that board. Would have been better if they used copper, but I don't think it affects it any. Would have costed a lot more and been heavier. The threads are nicely made, and when you screw them in and out, they don't grind or anything, so it's not a cheap. The knurling is very aggressive, so you'll feel that right away when you grab onto it. The bad thing is it might be too aggressive, but the good thing is you won't let it slip out of your hand. It gives you very good grip. So the machining is fine, but I'd say that the finishing could use some more work, because you see a lot of the machining marks, and you'll never see that on any of the U-torch or Mankers. Now here's a close look at the DC boost driver. You can see a 2.2 microhenry inductor there with a bunch of capacitors beside it. That's the magic behind the boost driver. So I'd say they've done a pretty good job with this driver. It performs very well, and there's not much I would change about it. Instead of using a spring, they put a nice brass button on the bottom, and I think that's a good space saver. For the tail cap, they also don't use a spring, they just use a little nub there. So when you screw that in, it makes contact with the battery, presses it against the brass button on the front, and gives you light. So you just gotta unscrew that half a turn, and it'll stop working, because there's no way the battery can contact the brass button and this aluminum button on the bottom at the same time. So I'll give you a summary of the teardown. I'd say that all the parts fit very well together. There's very tight tolerances. That's how they got this thing to be so small but still perform so well. The stainless steel bezel is very strong, as all stainless steel parts are, but it's very nicely finished as well. So it's a good touch to the flashlight. So a couple bad things, the O-rings are just standard. I wish they would have used silicone, but it's just standard black rubber. Hopefully you can find something at the hardware store that you can replace those with and make them better. Again, you can see a lot of the machining lines there, and it doesn't represent top quality like the other flashlights, so they can work on that. And I wish they gave a glass lens to put on the front and protect that TIR optic. And it's really too bad that the button is hard to press, because that reduces the functionality of it. So unless you put a little square piece of tape onto the button or super glue something onto the button, it's going to be difficult to press. I think the low battery protection is set at a good voltage, 2.9 volts, drops to low, and then it completely turns off at 2.85 volts, so it doesn't destroy your batteries. And this thing is easily tail standable. You can put it on the table, light up the entire room. Unfortunately, they didn't add a tail magnet to it, but I think that would have made it a little bit longer, so they didn't want to do that. But you can always glue a circular magnet to the bottom of yours if you want it to be more functional. So to add the TIR optic protection, all you got to do is take a clear water bottle or something. You might want to use a clear plastic iPhone screen protector, anything like that. You put the lens down onto it, you trace around the edge, and then you just cut it out. It'll fit right over top of that optic, and when the stainless steel bezel screws down into it, it'll hold it right into place. And to add some tape to the side switch, what I do is put packing tape down onto a piece of glass. You can do it on an old plate or something. Make about 4 layers of tape, and then you can use a knife to cut some squares out of it. Pick those squares off, and then just put it onto the button. So I think I put around 6, 7, 8 layers of tape on mine, and that raised it up high enough so that the button was easy to press, and way easier to use. Unfortunately, the DC to DC boost driver can't be modified, and unless you switch out that driver, you won't be able to do much. So in terms of thermal management, I'd say that the 90-second turbo timer does a pretty good job with that. They've timed it perfectly, but you gotta still be careful. It's for high-powered users only. This thing just comes with the flashlight by itself, no battery, no nothing, just that O-ring. It almost barely came with a cardboard box. So I bought a little Kala, and it works very well. I've had success with it, and they come for very cheap. You can get them on AliExpress. They used to be on GearBest, but not anymore. So if you're thinking $60 is a little bit too much to pay, you're probably kind of right, but if you want 3000 lumens, you gotta have 3000 lumens. So if you're able to carry around this 188 gram small everyday carry, it's definitely worth that premium price. After taking it apart, it is good quality, it's well built, it's meant to last, and to me that's great value for your dollar. It's not a $6 flashlight being advertised as a super powerful flashlight being sold for $80. It's actually a very good flashlight, and at $60, it's good bang for your buck. And I think because they tried to make this thing as small as they could, it's meant to be super powerful, tiny, everyday carry. And you got to be very careful with this thing. The button is like a trigger, and unscrewing that tail cap is like removing the one from the chamber and taking out your magazine. This thing is nuts. So I'd say don't give this thing away as a gift to people who don't know how to use a higher powered flashlight. It's definitely meant for the power hungry advanced flashlight users. Although it's very small, it's deceptively powerful. If you pull this out and hand it to your friends, they'll definitely be deceived by its size. They'll probably turn it on and point it right at the table right in front of them and then just blind themselves with it. So if you compare this light to other lights of a similar size, this thing crushes them. They made the smallest light possible with the most amount of lumens. If you're carrying this thing and it gets dark, you can easily light up the sidewalks, trails, walk across the field, and you'll light everything up. You won't need to wait for the sun to come out. It's already in your hand. There's no other way you can light up that whole trail with something this size. So they've done a very good job, and I highly recommend this flashlight. If I had to grade this light, I'd just give it an A. So I hope that gives you a good understanding of this light. So thank you to all my subscribers for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that review. There's going to be a lot more coming down the pipeline, like the Olight X7R. You can walk out into an entire field and light the whole thing up. There's no stopping that thing. And then we've also got a 6000 lumen IKEA do-it-yourself flashlight, and at 6000 lumens it can light up the entire field, which is crazy because it's a floodlight. And it was a $7 bulb from IKEA, which is only supposed to put out 1000 lumens, so that's pretty insane. So definitely stay tuned for those. I hope that helps. Thanks for watching.